In the jungles of Southeast Asia, Soviet radar operators stared at their screens in disbelief. The blip they tracked made no sense according to everything they knew about aerial combat. This aircraft was small, almost absurdly so. It flew slower than the supersonic jets dominating the skies of the 1960s. Yet somehow, this peculiar machine twisted through the air like nothing they had encountered before. What you just saw was one file. The Cold War was fought in secrets like this. Cold War Black Files is where those stories resurface. Subscribe. New files declassified. The confusion deepened with each passing week. Intelligence officers compiled reports from multiple sources, cross-referencing observations from ground controllers, pilot debriefs, and photographic reconnaissance. Every data point confirmed the same impossible reality. An aircraft that should have been easy prey was consistently outperforming machines designed specifically for air superiority. When intelligence reports filtered back to Moscow, military analysts dismissed the data as faulty equipment or exaggerated claims. The aircraft in question weighed nearly 5 tons when empty, but pilots were somehow coaxing it into the sky, carrying bomb loads exceeding 10,000 pounds. The mathematics seemed wrong. The performance characteristics violated accepted principles of aerodynamics and thrust-to-weight ratios. Soviet engineers conducted their own analysis, building models based on captured photographs and radar signatures. They calculated wing loading, estimated thrust output, and projected performance envelopes. Every simulation produced the same conclusion. This aircraft should not be capable of the maneuvers being reported. Yet the reports kept coming, each one more bewildering than the last. What confused them most was watching this machine engage their frontline fighters. The MiG-17, a formidable interceptor that had earned respect in Korean skies, found itself outmaneuvered by what appeared to be a glorified trainer aircraft. Soviet pilots reported encounters where they simply could not keep pace with the turning radius of this diminutive opponent. Some described it as fighting a hummingbird, an enemy that could pivot and reverse direction faster than human reflexes could track. The aircraft at the center of this confusion emerged from an unusual design philosophy. In the late 1950s, American naval aviation faced a dilemma. Carrier-based aircraft were becoming heavier, more complex, and exponentially more expensive. Each new generation required more deck space, more fuel, more maintenance hours. The trend was unsustainable, threatening to price the Navy out of effective air power. Admirals looked at procurement budgets with growing alarm. A single modern fighter cost as much as a small ship. Maintenance absorbed thousands of man-hours per flight hour. Carriers could embark fewer aircraft with each passing year as individual machines grew larger and more demanding. The entire system was approaching a breaking point where capability gains could not justify spiraling costs. One designer approached the problem from an entirely different angle. Instead of asking how to make aircraft more capable, he asked how to make them more efficient. His vision centered on brutal simplicity. Every component would serve multiple purposes. Every pound would justify its existence. The resulting machine would be so uncomplicated that it could be built and maintained at a fraction of the cost of contemporary designs. This philosophy bordered on heretical in an era obsessed with technological advancement. Other designers packed their proposals with cutting-edge radar systems, complex weapons integration, and sophisticated avionics. They promised aircraft that could perform a dozen missions with push-button ease. This designer promised something far less glamorous, an aircraft that would excel at one specific mission while being cheap enough to buy in large numbers. The airframe that emerged shocked industry observers. It possessed only 3 mechanical flight control systems instead of the usual dozen or more. The hydraulic system operated at pressures considered dangerously high by conservative engineers. The wingspan measured just over 27 feet, barely longer than some automobiles. The entire machine could fit in the garage of a suburban home. Critics called it a death trap. Budget analysts called it revolutionary. Manufacturing techniques reflected the same minimalist philosophy. The fuselage consisted of remarkably few parts compared to contemporary designs. Assembly time measured in hours rather than weeks. Specialized tooling requirements were minimal. A factory that could produce one conventional fighter could turn out 3 or 4 of these compact attackers in the same time frame. You see, what made this design truly remarkable was hidden in its geometry. The wing configuration utilized a specific delta shape with precisely calculated camber. This created an unusual aerodynamic property where the aircraft generated lift coefficients far exceeding expectations for its size. At low speeds, in the thick air where dogfights occurred, this translated into turn rates that larger, faster aircraft simply could not match. The wing design represented years of wind tunnel testing and mathematical modeling. Engineers explored hundreds of variations, tweaking sweep angles by fractions of a degree, adjusting thickness ratios in tiny increments. They discovered a sweet spot where multiple beneficial characteristics converged. The wing would be efficient in cruise, powerful in turns, and remarkably forgiving at high angles of attack. And the compact dimensions produced another unexpected advantage. The small profile presented minimal cross-section to enemy radar and visual acquisition. Pilots described it as disappearing in combat, particularly when viewed head-on. In an era before sophisticated missile systems, this made deflection shooting extraordinarily difficult. Enemy gunners accustomed to tracking larger targets found their sight pictures constantly shifting as the tiny attacker maneuvered. The lightweight construction meant the engine, while modest in thrust, provided acceleration characteristics that betrayed the aircraft's bomb truck mission. Pilots discovered they could enter combat, jettison external stores, and suddenly possess a nimble fighter that could engage virtually anything in the sky on favorable terms. The transformation was dramatic, like shedding a heavy coat before a foot race. During operations over Southeast Asia, these attributes combined in unexpected ways. Strike packages would encounter defending fighters. The small jets would release their ordnance and immediately transition to air combat maneuvering. Enemy pilots, expecting to bounce vulnerable bombers, instead found themselves in turning fights they could not win. The tactical employment evolved through hard-won experience. Early missions followed conventional doctrine, with escorts providing top cover while attack aircraft focused solely on ground targets. But reality in the skies over hostile territory proved far more chaotic than peacetime planning anticipated. Attacks often occurred without adequate fighter support. Pilots had to defend themselves or die. One particular engagement became legendary in naval aviation circles. A section of these compact jets encountered multiple enemy fighters at low altitude. What followed was a brutal demonstration of energy management and turn performance. The smaller aircraft simply flew circles around their opponents, converting the battle into a one-sided affair within moments. Pilots who survived described a feeling of helplessness as they watched their opponents maneuver with freedom they could not match. The engagement was dissected and analyzed at the highest levels of command. Tacticians studied gun camera footage frame by frame. They measured turn radii, calculated energy states, and reconstructed the three-dimensional geometry of the fight. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about air combat in the missile age, and the small jets had won through superior positioning and energy management. They exploited advantages in turn rate and acceleration to control engagement geometry. They forced opponents into unfavorable positions and kept them there through relentless maneuvering. Advanced technology and sophisticated systems meant nothing when the basic physics of the fight favored the simpler machine. Word spread through the naval aviation community. Pilots who had viewed the compact attackers as mere bomb haulers began reassessing their capabilities. Training syllabi were revised to include air combat maneuvering profiles. Maintenance crews noticed pilots pushing their mounts harder, exploring performance envelopes that previous generations had never tested. Years later, an entirely different chapter began, when the United States Navy established an adversary training program designed to expose its fighter pilots to realistic threats. The concept emerged from painful lessons learned in Southeast Asia, where American pilots had entered combat without adequate preparation for the harsh realities of close-range fighting. The Navy needed aircraft that could replicate enemy tactics and performance characteristics. Someone suggested using the old attack jets. The idea seemed absurd initially. These were bombers, not fighters. They lacked the sophisticated radar systems and long-range missiles of modern interceptors. Their avionics consisted of basic instruments and simple weapons delivery computers. They represented old technology, old thinking, old doctrine. But someone remembered those engagement reports from years earlier. So when training exercises commenced, something remarkable happened. The Navy's newest fighter, a massive swing-wing interceptor bristling with technology, consistently lost engagements against the tiny attackers. Pilots flying the most advanced aircraft in the American inventory found themselves unable to bring their sophisticated weapons to bear. The smaller jets simply refused to fight at the ranges and speeds where the big fighters held advantages. The initial results were dismissed as anomalies. Perhaps the adversary pilots were simply better trained. Perhaps the exercise rules were unrealistic. Perhaps the weather conditions had skewed outcomes. But as exercises continued, patterns emerged that could not be explained away. The small jets were not winning through luck or favorable conditions, as they were winning through fundamental advantages in the close-range maneuvering domain. Instead, they dragged every fight into slow-speed turning battles where decades-old aerodynamics trumped millions of dollars in avionics. Experienced adversary pilots learned to exploit every quirk of their mounts. They understood precisely how hard they could pull, exactly when to deploy speed brakes, the optimal altitude for maximum maneuverability. They became artists of energy management, painting masterpieces in the sky with machines that cost less than a single missile carried by their opponents. The training program revealed uncomfortable truths about modern air combat. Sophisticated systems meant nothing if you could not position your aircraft to employ them. Missile technology provided no advantage if the enemy stayed inside your turning radius. Speed became a liability when fighting at altitudes where power and wing loading determined outcomes. The lessons were humbling for pilots who had grown comfortable with technological superiority. Fighter pilots began approaching training with newfound respect for their diminutive opponents. The small jets taught harsh lessons about energy management, tactical patience, and the dangers of complacency. Entire generations of aviators learned to fight properly because they first had to learn how to defeat an aircraft that should have been hopelessly outclassed. Instructors used these engagements to demonstrate fundamental principles that applied regardless of aircraft type. Debriefings after training missions became intense educational sessions, but instructors would replay engagements, freezing frames at critical decision points. They would ask students to explain their tactical choices, then demonstrate how those choices had sealed their fate. The small jets served as perfect teaching tools because they forgave no mistakes and rewarded sound fundamentals. The secret behind these improbable victories lay in ruthless optimization. Every aspect of the design focused on a specific mission profile. The engineers who created this machine understood that trying to excel at everything meant excelling at nothing. By accepting limitations in range, payload capacity, and systems complexity, they achieved excellence in the metrics that mattered most for close-range combat. This design philosophy represented a conscious rejection of the prevailing wisdom in military aviation. While competitors chased multi-role capability and technological sophistication, this team pursued perfection in a narrowly defined domain. They understood that wars are won by platforms that execute their intended missions superbly, not by platforms that perform many missions adequately. The wing design deserves particular attention. The specific combination of thickness ratio, leading edge sweep, and aspect ratio created a vortex flow pattern at high angles of attack. This allowed sustained turn rates at speeds where conventional wings would stall. Pilots could pull the aircraft to the edge of controllability and hold it there, tracing impossibly tight circles in the sky. The wing would shake and buffet, warning of impending departure, but it would keep flying. Engineers had discovered that at certain angles and speeds, vortices forming along the wing leading edge actually enhanced lift rather than disrupting it. This counterintuitive phenomenon required precise shaping to exploit. The vortices had to form at predictable locations and remain stable through the maneuvering envelope. Achieving this consistency demanded manufacturing tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Weight distribution played an equally crucial role. The compact fuselage and centralized mass created low moment of inertia around all three axes. This meant the aircraft could change direction with minimal energy loss. In a turning fight, this translated to maintaining speed through maneuvers that bled energy from larger opponents. Physics became an ally, with every design choice reinforcing the others in a symphony of aerodynamic efficiency. The engine installation demonstrated the same thoughtful integration. Positioning it close to the center of gravity minimized pitch changes during throttle inputs. The intake design provided clean airflow across the entire speed range. Even the exhaust nozzle contributed to maneuverability through careful shaping that reduced drag at high angles of attack. The simplicity that critics had mocked became the key to operational success. Maintenance crews could turn aircraft around in minutes rather than hours. A complete engine change required less than 4 hours with a trained crew. Spare parts were cheap and plentiful. Common components meant logistics chains remained simple even during extended deployments. When more complex aircraft sat grounded waiting for specialized components or expert technicians, these workhorses kept flying. Squadron commanders loved them for their reliability. Mission planners loved them for their flexibility. Accountants loved them for their affordability. This combination of virtues ensured continued production long after initial orders had been fulfilled. Nations that could never afford cutting-edge fighters could field capable attack aircraft in meaningful numbers. Over decades of service, the design proved adaptable beyond original expectations. Nations around the world operated variants customized for their specific needs. Some configured them for reconnaissance, packing camera systems into modified bomb bays. Others optimized them for ground attack, experimenting with weapons configurations the original designers had never imagined. A few even experimented with air-to-air configurations bristling with heat-seeking missiles. The aircraft served in conflicts on every continent except Antarctica. It flew in deserts where sand abraded everything mechanical. It operated from jungle airstrips where humidity corroded exposed metal within days. It launched from carriers in Arctic waters where ice formed on flight decks. In every environment, it proved remarkably robust and maintainable. Foreign operators discovered their own tricks and techniques. Some nations developed specialized weapons uniquely suited to their strategic needs. Others created training programs that extracted performance capabilities the original manufacturer had never documented. The aircraft became a platform for innovation precisely because its simplicity made modification straightforward. The aircraft that confused Soviet observers taught military aviation a lesson about the relationship between cost, capability, and mission effectiveness. Sometimes the optimal solution is not the most technologically advanced option. Sometimes brutal simplicity defeats elegant complexity. Sometimes a small, inexpensive aircraft can humble the most sophisticated machines humans can build. This lesson resonates beyond aviation. It speaks to fundamental questions about how complex systems should be designed. It challenges the assumption that newer is always better, that complexity equals capability, that price correlates with effectiveness. These assumptions pervade military procurement, technology development, and industrial design. This humble aircraft proved them wrong. Decades after its introduction, and analysts still study this design as a masterclass in engineering discipline. Business schools use it as a case study in value engineering. Military academies examine its development as an example of requirements discipline. The machine itself may have faded into history, but the principles it embodied remain timeless. In the end, this modest jet earned a reputation that transcended its humble origins. It became a symbol of the idea that good engineering is about making smart choices, not just impressive specifications. The story of how a budget attack aircraft became a feared adversary proves that in combat, as in life, success comes not from having every advantage, but from using the advantages you have with perfect efficiency. Pilots who flew it remember not just an aircraft, but a philosophy made tangible. And they speak of a machine that demanded skill but rewarded proficiency. They describe an honest airplane that told you exactly what it was doing and exactly what it could do. There were no electronic systems to mask mistakes or compensate for poor technique. Success required fundamental airmanship. The legacy extends into modern aviation. Contemporary designers still reference this aircraft when discussing trade-offs between capability and complexity. When programs spiral over budget and behind schedule, engineers ask what this design team would have done differently. The answer usually involves ruthless elimination of non-essential features and relentless focus on core mission requirements. Training squadrons still teach the lessons this aircraft embodied. Young pilots learn that technology cannot substitute for skill, and that tactical employment matters more than technical specifications, that understanding your aircraft's strengths and limitations matters more than having the newest systems. These lessons, learned through thousands of training engagements over decades, form the foundation of professional airmanship. The machine that once confused Soviet radar operators stands now as a testament to timeless principles. It proved that imagination and discipline can overcome resource limitations. It demonstrated that elegant solutions emerge from understanding problems deeply rather than throwing technology at them indiscriminately. Most importantly, it showed that sometimes the best answer to a complex problem is brilliant simplicity.